Welcome to the Steelers Breakdown Podcast from Penn Live, featuring Penn Live's Steelers beat reporter Nick Farabaugh, who's fresh from returning to the Steel City from Indy, where your Steelers fell 3 points short, despite a furious comeback attempt by Justin Fields, who remains the QB2 on Mike Tomlin's depth chart. But in the hearts and minds of a large swath of Steelers Nation, he won the job. They took the reins off of him and he ran and threw the Steelers back into contention in that game. A game maybe they should have won, except for an uncharacteristic breakdown by the supposedly elite Steelers D. And we'll talk chapter and verse of what went wrong with the defensive effort in Indy as we get ready for Big D, meaning the Dallas Cowboys, coming into Acrisure for a prime time matchup this Sunday night. But we would be remiss if we did not discuss the offensive line, because Nick is an expert on it, and the Steelers are once again shuffling as they lose another starter, guard James Daniels, to a season-ending Achilles injury. The hits just keep on coming there. And finally, we got to talk about Najee Harris. First of all, he didn't seem to have the pop that Cordero Patterson had during the game when he relieved Najee. And then there was some interesting post-game comments that Harris made, and sort of saying, well, why are we talking about Justin Fields? It was the whole offense that mounted that comeback that fell just short. So we got to figure out what's going on with him. But without further ado, we turn it over to Nick to hear the latest from Mike Tomlin, fresh from his news conference. And what was the discussion about Justin Fields and the supposed starter, Russell Wilson, who remains hampered by that calf injury?
Yeah, Russ is getting close. I think this is the first time he is going to probably practice in team period since injuring that. That was 4 weeks ago at this point, John. It has been a long, arduous journey. He first injured that calf on July 26th. And so it has been a long time. And then he re injured it, of course, 3 days before they played the Falcons in Atlanta. So this is going to be the first time he's going to be in a live pocket since he re-injured that. And we'll see when that is, whether that's Thursday, Friday. He's going to have another strong week of work. It seems like he's going to ramp up. Is he going to be fully ready for Sunday? I wouldn't bet on it. Mike Tomlin did say again they are preparing for Justin Fields to be the starting quarterback. And listen, I mean, we still are where we were last week. We had this discussion. Why not name Justin Fields a starter? Why not name Russell Wilson the starter? Why not do one thing or the other? Still not doing it. Mike Tomlin left the door open to Justin Fields being named the starter. He left the door open to Russell Wilson coming back and taking the job. This is where we're going to be until Russ is fully healthy. And I think that's going to be not this week. I think that'll be next week when that discussion really ramps up for their game against the Raiders. So that is going to be something to think about. But I think Fields right now preparing to play. And listen, Mike Tomlin really was complimentary of Justin Fields. I think there was, there's a few things about Justin Fields that he probably learned, in terms, they talk a lot about their relationship and, how different circumstances kind of breed out different traits of guys, right? So Justin Fields and Mike Tomlin together had never been down in a deficit like that, right? Would he collapse? Would he, was he not be the leader that you would want him to be? Like, you learn different things about guys. And obviously the team fought back. Justin Fields had a great second half. Obviously, he's part of the reason why they were in that hole to begin with the sack fumble, of course, and some lackluster first half play, I would say. But what he did in the second half was fantastic. It was the best we had seen him in a Steelers uniform. And Mike Tomlin said in his great phrase, he didn't blink. That is kind of where Justin Fields is right now. I think he impressed Mike Tomlin. I think he impressed a lot of people with his second half effort. I mean, he almost did bring them back to win that game. He injected life into the offense. I think in a lot of ways he overcame a lot of bad play around him, whether that was the offensive line, whether that was the receiver play, whether that was Arthur Smith, who I think probably called his worst game as a Steelers offensive coordinator against Indianapolis. I thought Justin Fields kind of overcame a lot of that in that second half. But we'll see kind of where it goes. I don't know if there's a decision made. I don't know if Mike Tomlin in his mind has fully made that decision yet, but it seems like Justin Fields is going to have one more game at this before Russell Wilson's fully healthy. And from there, we will see where this goes.
My question is, because as you have really chronicled since training camp, the the improvement with Fields, and then to sort of in the regular season opening it up more and more and more, and then of course when we got behind by 17 points, all bets were off. You open it up, and he's running and throwing, ran for over 50 yards and 2 touchdowns, threw for over 300 yards. And so we saw him open up. We saw him not blink. And the question is, to me, it's not the QB1 or the QB2. It's the QB of the future. He has the potential to be the QB of the future where Russell Wilson doesn't. So I know they really want to win this year, and they really want to make the playoffs this year, and they think they have the defense to do it despite the effort in Indy. So I guess it's a question of which of the mix is more important to them, winning this season or building for the future. Is there any color that you can give us from your insight on that?
Listen. I think obviously they prioritize winning first. If they had prioritized the future last year, Kenny Pickett would have started over Mason Rudolph when he was ready to return. So that is something Mike Tomlin wants to win. He wants to win playoff games. They will prioritize winning. I'm just not sure Justin Fields doesn't bring both of them together right now. I mean, look at what the offensive line is right now. It's an inexperienced young group. It's a mishmash of players. They have not had the same starting five, and they are not going to have the same starting five for any week in the first 5 weeks because of injuries, because of shuffling the board. So this is like the continuity on the offensive line is an issue. So you get free pressure. Justin Fields is able to mitigate that. At this point in his career, is Russell Wilson able to mitigate that? I think that's a significant question. Now, Russell Wilson brings his own positives and, can maybe give them different looks in the passing game and do some different things. But Fields, in terms of declaring him QB of the future, in my opinion, 4 games, obviously, anyone that is saying right now after 4 games, Justin Fields is anything of the future. Even if I'm not even confident he's getting a contract from them next year through 4 games. Like, you need more than just that. You probably need, 10, 12 games on your team. Like, yes, there were signs last year, near the end of last year with Chicago, that Fields was starting to become the quarterback you've seen him become here in Pittsburgh right now. But what you really need is you need 10 to 12 in your system, seeing what he can do to fully buy into that. At least 8, though, at the minimum, right? They need half the season at least to see what he can do. And so we'll see. I think they're going to, though, run with the guy that they think gives them the best chance to win. I think that's going to be what they do this year. And whether that's Wilson or Fields in their mind is the question. I think right now, from what I've seen from both these quarterbacks over camp, in the preseason, the current construction of the team, I think it would be Justin Fields, but we'll see where that goes.
Let me ask you this about the long-term evaluation of Justin Fields, which I agree has to be over a protracted number of games, as you mentioned. Given the way this offensive line keeps taking hits with season-ending injuries and the reshuffling that you rightly mentioned has been a different 5-man configuration for every game so far, including the next one coming up. Can you truly evaluate Fields, given the tenuous nature of this line, and also the fact that he really does lack a wide receiver 2 on this roster?
Well, you can, and the way you kind of evaluate quarterbacks in suboptimal situations is if they give you the flashes, is if they give you the nuggets to buy into, right? Listen, there are a lot of quarterbacks that go into suboptimal situations, and sometimes they pop a little bit, right? They pop and show you something to buy into. Justin Fields has given the Steelers plenty through 4 games to buy into. Again, he's not in a great circumstance. You mentioned the wide receiver issues. You mentioned what is going on the offensive line. And I think the second half performance was Justin Fields, to a large degree, outperforming his surroundings. Like, that is a guy, and we obviously, again, we need to see this over multiple games, weeks, but that is a guy that you can say, okay, you can talk yourself into, because he's creating plays outside of structure that aren't there. Okay, the all the routes are covered up in the red zone. He barrels it in for 2 touchdowns. Like, he elevated the team around him in that second half in their comeback efforts. You just look at some of the plays he made outside of structure before the half, stepping outside of pressure. He would have been sacked, steps outside of pressure, throws it across his body to Pat Frymuth. They end up getting a field goal right before the half. On the second drive of the third quarter, their first touchdown drive of the game, remember, he steps out of pressure, looks like he's going to scramble, turns his shoulders, and fires that dart to George Pickens down the field, gets them in the red zone. You just look at what he did outside of structure throughout the day, and he elevated team. I think one thing I love about Fields right now, and what's kind of very encouraging about his performance, though, is that he's not going out of structure when he doesn't need to. He's not bailing on clean pockets. Now, he sacked himself about 3 times in that game by holding the ball too long. I think that's something that you want to see improved. I think you don't want him running 20 yards backwards, getting sacked, and then fumbling the ball and taking you out of field goal range. That was, the old Justin Fields that you had been trying to take him out of. You don't want to have that. Get to the hot, take the sack, throw it away, do something else. Do not run 20 yards backwards and fumble the football, even if there's 2 free rushers coming at you. But what he's doing is he is trying to stay in the pocket, win from the pocket, process. There's going to be natural limitations to some things Justin Fields always does. He's not really an anticipatory thrower. He's a see ball, throw open guy. He's not really a guy that anticipates windows going from 1 to 2. He can do it at times, but it's not a consistent trademark of his game. He's probably going to take bad sacks throughout his career. His internal clock's always just going to be a little tick slower, but he has cut it down from where it was in Chicago to where it, was one of the worst in the league to where it's now about league average. Like, that is where you kind of need to be with Justin Fields. And so, the sacks, they're an issue. He's never going to be great, but if he can be average or just slightly below average, you could live with it. And then, of course, as well, cutting down the turnovers. That has been another thing. He's given you a lot of positives. I think there's definitely some things I still want to see improved. There's as we mentioned, the anticipatory throws. I would like to see him take less sacks and get the ball out, make quicker decisions against the blitz, different things like that. But he has given you a lot of positives, and so there's a lot to buy into through 4 games with Justin Fields that give you positives, but he's going to have to show you that consistently, because remember, if you want to keep him, if you believe in him, you're looking probably at $30 million or more per year. That's a large investment in one player, so you better be sure about it.
I'll tell you, that was one of the best breakdowns of Fields that I've heard, and it's why Penn Live readers appreciate your Steelers content to literally the tune of millions of views. Nick is just blowing it up at Penn Live with his Steelers coverage. But you also mentioned the flip side to this offense that we saw in Indy, and you said Arthur Smith was subpar, and perhaps the receivers as well. What were the glaring issues that you saw with offense, and what's the correction that could be coming at home against Dallas?
There's a lot that went wrong with the offense still. You talk about the O-line. That is hard to fix. It's personnel related for the most part. Listen, when you have 5 different combinations of players in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, it is hard to stay kind of there, right? A lot of these, I will say the one big thing that can be fixed, whether you blame Fields, whether you blame Frazier, whether you blame the guards, these snap issues, they just cannot keep happening. This is JV stuff that should have been fixed in the second week of training camp after it happened against Houston. We've been talking about this since August 9th, and it is now October 1st, and this is still an issue. You cannot have bad snaps. It cost them the game. I mean, if you want to look at one play that cost them the game, there were a lot of missed opportunities, John, in this game, but that bad snap on the final drive, it looked like they were starting to drive, right? They were having the momentum, and then that knocked them back, put them at 2nd and 22, and after that, it was curtains. So you cannot have that happen. And one thing that people were like, well, it only happened once in the game. Early in the game, if you remember, Fields was under center. It was going to be a handoff to Najee Harris, and Frazier and him kind of get their feet tangled. He slips. Najee Harris gets the ball, nearly fumbles it. It's a 2-yard loss. They're lucky that wasn't worse than it was. This has happened consistently on the road. Their silent counts have not been good. I know a lot of people are blaming Frazier for what happened in Indy. I don't think it was his fault. I think it was either Fields or McCormick. I'm leaning towards Fields' explanation for that one, in which case Justin Fields does bear the brunt of that. And so these things need to be fixed. That is a big part of it. For the offensive line, you got to try and mitigate them. Move the pocket a little bit. Find their strengths. Find who is the best five. Another thing I'm tired of. Stop rotating the offensive line. This is not. It's not conducive. It's a rhythm-based position. Just as much as quarterback is a rhythm-based position. You need to get into a rhythm. You need to warm up to the physicality of a game sometimes at offensive line. So whoever is the best starting right guard moving forward, if you think that's Spencer Anderson, if you think that's Mason McCormick, start one of them. Don't rotate them. And so that's going to be something we'll see. They can get better. They have guys that can get better. The possible addition this week of Isaac Seumalo is going to be absolutely huge. It sounds like he's going to come back. That will be important for them. So that'll be a big boost. Dak Frazier and Mason McCormick or Spencer Anderson, those two need to keep getting better each week. Same thing with Broderick Jones at right tackle. I think wide receiver, again, we talk about personnel issues. They don't have the guys here at wide receiver to necessarily fix it. But Arthur Smith, stop asking Van Jefferson to insert block from condensed sets. It is destroying the run game. And this is where we get into the biggest issue with the offense to me, John, is the run game. The run game is not good. I know that in raw totals, it is good, right? They're getting like 136 yards per game. That's a pretty solid running offense, but it's almost all off volume. They're 31st in success rate. I think they're 29th in yards per carry. They are not an efficient running offense. They are the worst rushing team on first down in the NFL right now in terms of yards per carry and success rate. So their early down success rate running the ball is terrible. And there's a big part of this. Part of it's the O-line play. I give it to that. But part of it is Arthur Smith just running the ball into brick walls. The schematics are not good. You talk about the personnel usage. Again, stop asking these wide receivers to dig out these safeties. It gives them a free runner every time. They bring us extra safety into the box and blitz them right off the edge. It's predictable. You need to throw the ball more on first down if you see those looks. And they started to do that in the second half, and that's when the offense got rolling through the air, and it opened up some lanes for Justin Fields in the quarterback run game. The running back run game never really got going outside of the short Cordero Patterson series, which also brings me to my next point. Najee Harris is not a good fit in this offense. He's not. They need to tailor Najee Harris's carries to Najee Harris. He is a pretty good inside zone runner. He's very good at running duo, and he can be pretty good at running certain gap schemes. Stop running outside zone. Stop tossing the ball to him in outside zone. He is not explosive enough. He's not quick enough. In order to run Arthur Smith's offense as intended, where you have these quick hitting gap runs or the outside zone stuff, you need to run downhill and hit it with authority. Jaylen Warren does that. Cordero Patterson does that. Najee Harris doesn't do that. So change your runs to fit Najee Harris. I think that's a big thing. You look at his outside zone runs right now, which he had 9 of his 13 carries were outside zone runs. On Sunday, he's averaging 2.93 yards per carry over his career on outside zone. This year, he is averaging less than 2 yards per carry on outside zone. Stop having him run outside zone. It is not good schematics. So what is going on with the offensive problems? I think the biggest problem they have right now that can be fixed outside of the snap issues is this run game. This run game can be fixed. It can be salvaged. I think they have pieces here to work. Najee Harris is getting a lot of criticism around Pittsburgh today. And listen, I understand it. He's not running well. He's not running efficient. I get it. He has natural limitations. He's not a super fast running back. He's a huge running back, though, that we have seen be effective in offense. You remember the end of last year, down the stretch, the last 2 games of the year against Seattle and Baltimore, he kind of was the engine of that offense. And so there is a clear path to him being a very good running back and being a weapon for them. So his limitations have to be worked around. They are highlighting his weaknesses right now, and it is making him look extremely bad out on the football field. Stop making Van Jefferson block these guys. If you need someone to block, it should either be George Pickens or start making Roman Wilson active. That's another thing that they can do. He's a solid blocker. He's probably their second or best wide receiver blocker. Or make that Pat Freiermuth do something different. It can't be Van Jefferson anymore. If you see teams rolling down the extra safety and blitzing off the edge, start passing more on first downs. Because there's a stat called neutral pass rate, John. What this means is basically in neutral rates where you can either pass or run, how much do you pass? And more efficient teams, more top teams tend to pass the ball or at least mix up their versatility. The Steelers are 30th in that right now. Arthur Smith is too predictable out of the formations and spots where he runs the ball, so teams are keying in on their run. And so he's got to mix that up a little bit, and the offensive line has to play better. And so there's a lot going on there. But this is fixable. The Steelers just need to self-scout and change what they did. They started doing it in the second half, which means maybe that's coming.
Arthur Smith, are you listening to this? We got to fix this offense because I'll tell you, I'm a big believer in that you got to scheme and coach to your player's strength. And certainly we don't want to see Najee Harris set up to fail, but I have to wonder because obviously the decision on his fifth-year extension was made after Arthur Smith was brought in. I wonder if it was apparent even back then that he did not fit the preferred scheme that Smith likes to run, and that made him expendable.
Well, John, I remember at the first day of training camp, the reason he said they gave him for why they declined his fifth-year option was because they weren't sure about his scheme fit. And that is exactly what is showing up. But he's here for this year, so tailor it to him. He's the only healthy back right now of the top three backs. Warren and Patterson are both banged up. Now, they both might play this week. We'll see. The door is open for both of those guys. But Najee Harris, is not what he has looked like through the first 4 weeks. He's averaging 3.4 yards per carry. I mean, that is just a base level stat, but obviously not good. And so that's how you can fix, that offensive game plan. I think they have the pieces here to do it. And I think you saw Arthur Smith start to kind of get it going in that fourth quarter against the Chargers. Like they wore them down. But those runs Najee and Cordero popped off were pretty tailored to them. Like Najee's big run was duo. Like it was one of his bread and butter runs. Like he was comfortable doing it. And it works because his patience and kind of plotting style really fit that scheme, right? And so there's different things you can do with Najee. And so there's positives from this offense, obviously, with how Justin Fields played, how George Pickens is playing, and all that. But the offense can fix the run game schematics. The other thing they can fix is just to stop doing, penalties, the false starts, the delay of games, the personal foul on Spencer Anderson that kicked them out of field goal range, George Pickens fumbling at the 2-yard line, just things like that. Clean up all the little details. It needs to be a detail-oriented offense, and it's not playing like one right now.
Right. The way Pickens held the ball on that fumble was ridiculous. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it was a one-handed fumble. I clearly get what he was trying to do. He was trying to duck under that tackle and then reach for the pylon for the touchdown. That's what he was doing. But if there's a defender there, you obviously can't hold it with one hand. And more importantly, he's holding it in the wrong hand. He's got to hold it in the offhand. So, yeah, a lot going wrong there. That's just like fundamental stuff that runs you up the wall with the Steelers team. The snaps, false starts, delay of game out of nowhere, the fumble. I'd even throw Fields doing what he did and just running 20 yards back. Like just things that you can't do. It just hurts them. And so that's really where it is. But we talked about, the negative there a lot. There are positives. As we've talked about with Fields, Pickens is playing well. Freiermuth has been very good. And there's enough talent, I think, up front, even without Daniels Fautanu, to get things going here. Frazier's played very well. Ciamalo will be coming back. Moore and Jones are very good run blockers, and McCormick had a very promising first game. So there's enough there to work with. So there are positives. I don't want to sound like I'm just all negative on the offense. I know I kind of ranted on what needs to be fixed. But yeah, there's a lot that can be fixed, and this offense could be a lot better than it is right now.
One last question on that offense. And it goes back to Najee Harris and all the reasons that he may be frustrated: the contract, the lack of the scheme fit, the plunging per carry average that you noted. But those comments that he made public after the game, talking about expressing almost irritation that Fields was getting the credit and accolades for the furious comeback in the second half. What do you make of that? Are we losing his head in the game, knowing that this is his final season in Pittsburgh? What's going on with him inside the helmet, so to speak?
I'm sure he's frustrated. Najee is not a stupid player. He knows, what the process leads to. Just because the results are sparkling, Najee kind of knows some things. Like they were 3-0, but there was obviously problems on that offense. Najee knew. Um, there's probably frustration there. Listen, Najee is also not someone super keen talking to the media. You listen to the question he was asked, and it was just asking what he thought about Justin Fields' play in the second half. I mean, listen, that's not a hard question. That's a softball of a question. You can easily just say he played well, he led us, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure it's a very good question. I don't think you need to necessarily be asking players, Najee Harris specifically, about how the quarterback played. You can ask about his leadership, but I'm not sure what Najee Harris can necessarily say from his vantage point. But I do think, that he doesn't love talking to the media. He doesn't like dumb questions. I know that for a fact because I've seen him shoot them down a lot, and so that's part of his thing too here in Pittsburgh. Is he just does not like talking to the media. So he was a little combative there as a result of that too. Didn't like the question because he didn't think it was a very good one. I don't think there's a ton going on up in Najee's head other than he knows there are issues that need to be fixed, and he puts the blame on himself too. So it's not like he doesn't take blame for things. It's just I think that kind of clashed with what happened in the game paired with things that we have seen with Najee Harris in terms of his press conferences over the years.
Good way to put that into context. Now let's turn to the two Ds, the defense and Dallas. I mean, what can we make of some of the defensive breakdowns? Did that expose any flaws or long-term issues? And what are we to make of this prime time matchup in Pittsburgh between the Steelers and the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, listen, they had flaws. I think the linebacker play through 3 weeks. I know everybody didn't talk about it because it didn't show up, but I think if you watched the tape enough, you knew that Peyton Wilson and Patrick Queen were struggling. Not to the extent they did against the Colts, but they didn't play super well through 3 weeks. Landon Roberts has been playing well, but this was not a game for Landon Roberts. They play a ton of 3-4 wide, spread you out, stress you in coverage. So you had to go with your athletic guys. I think linebacker position is a concern. Patrick Queen, the big signing of the offseason, has just not played well. I mean, you can't mince words. He has just not played well. They kind of attacked Queen and Wilson all game. That was the Colts' game plan. They came out and said, all right, we're going to stress your linebackers, and we're going to test them. And they didn't hold up. There were a few things. I think, the Colts in particular match up extremely well against the Steelers. That most teams just do not match up as well against the Steelers as the Colts do, but the Colts have an offensive line that can probably neutralize the Steelers' biggest strength, which is their defensive line. The Colts to me have a top 3 offensive line in football. Like you look at the players across that 5, I mean they are really good. And there's a lot of underrated players on that line. Like not a lot of people talk about Will Fries and Bernard Raymond. They are legitimately good players. And so they kind of neutralize the D line. We hadn't seen what happens when a team neutralizes the defensive line. The defensive line just dominated the first 3 weeks, right? No one could block them. And so as the Steelers started to get going a little bit more in the second half, right? They only allowed 10 points in the second half. As they started to kind of get going a little bit more, you saw the defensive line start to win a little bit more. That's kind of when they started to slow that down a little bit. Joe Flacco to Anthony Richardson is also like a massive whiplash, right? It's like alien with incredible rushing ability to 40-year-old statue. It's like the craziest transition you could do. So I think they didn't transition very well to that that style change right away. But even when Richardson was in there, they were not prepared for the QB run game very much at all. So there were a lot of things that were concerning about that. It was just really odd. Communication breakdowns. A few of those touchdowns were just busted coverages. They had a few busted coverages. The last touchdown to the tight end, half the people were in man coverage, the other were in zone, and like that can't happen, right? That's communication issues. So the Steelers have to fix that. The communication is like the easiest thing to fix. Like get the call in, be in the right place, run your right responsibility. So I think that's something that they can look at. I think the Colts, though, are not everyone's going to be able to neutralize the Steelers' defensive line. It's probably the best in the NFL, I still think. I know people were down on the defensive line after that game. If you watch the tape, Nick Herbig had a pretty good game. He started out rough. They went at him at the run, but I think he improved even with the injury. He improved over the game. Keanu Benton had a really good game. Cam Hayward had a pretty good game. Like, they had a solid game. The Colts just have like this perfect storm of offensive line that can run block, kind of neutralize the Steelers. They have great wide receivers that are different skill sets, and they have Josh Downs who can really exploit them. These twitchy, quick slot receivers, really tough matchups for the Steelers because they play a lot of cover 3, and if you're facing empty in cover 3, you have a few checks, right? There's parts of that cover 3 scheme where that's when you see, Peyton Wilson or Patrick Queen on a wide receiver, and you're like, why is there a linebacker on a wide receiver? Well, the Steelers did adjust to it. They started putting Joey Porter Jr. and Dante Jackson in the slot, but Downs is one of those guys that's just so slippery and is such a good receiver after the catch that, Dante Jackson, you remember on that 3rd and 7, there was a flat route and Downs forced a missed tackle on Jackson. Like, there was another where they played man up in the slot. Downs ran a slant, tight coverage, still caught it. Like, there's just ways to exploit the Steelers scheme, and the Colts personnel is like perfectly set to do that. And Flacco's quick decision making and ability to process defenses meant the Steelers couldn't blitz either. And so that really, it was like the perfect storm. They are a really tough matchup for the Steelers. You saw the same thing with the Texans last year when the Steelers went into Houston and just got walloped, right? Same type of matchup, like just tough matchups for the Steelers. They're not built for kind of teams like this unless the defensive line takes over. And when the Steelers beat teams like this, like last year, I remember they beat the Packers. The defensive line was just amazing in that game, right? The defensive line takes over in those games. And then they had like some uncharacteristic bad games from really good players. Like Joey Porter Jr. didn't have a very good game. Minkah Fitzpatrick didn't have a very good game. TJ Watt was held silent for a lot of the game. Larry Ogunjobi had his worst game of the season. Like, Herbig came out slow. Benton came out slow. Even though a lot of those guys ended up having good games, by the time they, fully head up, it was 14-0. I mean, so it was just tough to kind of get going. And so this is fixable. I still believe this is a very, very good defense. I think they ran into a really bad matchup. I think Shane Steichen knows where the bones are buried in Mike Tomlin's defense, and they didn't do a ton of schematic changes and disguises and, cool stuff. Because they didn't really know how to fully adjust from Richardson to Flacco mid-game, and that falls on the coaches. So the coaches, Arthur Smith, Mike Tomlin, and Terrell Austin, the coaches deserve as much of the blame as the players in this one. This was a badly coached game. They got absolutely out-coached in this one. But it was a uniquely bad matchup for the Steelers, and I don't think it's going to look that same way. But this week they have a tough matchup too. The Cowboys are weird, and that's the best way I can put it. They have a lot of really high-end talent. Dak Prescott, really good player to me. Very underrated quarterback. I know he gets a lot of hate for his lack of playoff success, but he's a very good player. CeeDee Lamb, probably a top 3 receiver in the NFL. Gets his no matter what. Jake Ferguson's a really good tight end. I like Brandon Cooks on the outside. Like, this is a pretty good weapons group. Here's the issue with the Dallas Cowboys. They can't run the football. And that's a huge issue when you face the Steelers. If you can't run the ball and force them to respect your run game, things can go south very quickly because the defensive line is just going to pin their ears back and rush at you. And that's probably what's going to happen. And this Cowboys offensive line is not built for the Steelers' defensive line. It's not. I think the Steelers' defensive line holds a decided advantage in that matchup. And that matters especially for guys like Nick Herbig, right? A smaller player. If he can just go at you, he can use his explosiveness, bend, and get significant production. And so this group is just not built for the Steelers' defensive line. So if the Steelers' defensive line comes out and doesn't win this matchup handily, that is concerning. And Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and those guys are probably going to get their production. They're going to make a few plays. But you also look, one thing we talked about last week on here was how explosive the Colts were. The Colts were able to get explosive plays against the Steelers. So like that was a big part of that. They were just able to get explosive play. The Cowboys have the second least explosive plays in the NFL. They have just 15 explosive plays through 4 games. So that is not good. And the Steelers theoretically should be able to keep things in front of them. This is very similar to the Chargers matchup to me, where you came into that game, you had a great run game, obviously humming into that one, but they weren't a very explosive offense, and there are limitations that were clearly able to be exploited by the Steelers. I feel that same way about this offense versus this defense. Meanwhile, that Dallas defense is a mess. It really is. You watch that Thursday night game, how the Giants only scored 15 points should be chalked up to Daniel Jones just blowing his mind out or something. I don't know, but it was tough. It was tough to watch. And the Dallas Cowboys now are going to be without DeMarcus Lawrence. They're probably going to be without Micah Parsons. Both of them are hurt.
Wow.
So your starting guys are going to be probably Marshawn Kneeland, who's a rookie, promising rookie, but a rookie, and then Chauncey Golston or Tyrus Wheat, and that is not what you want your starting edge duo to be. This interior defensive line is rough. Mozzie Smith, who's a former first-round pick, had a really good game last week, but he had kind of been an underperformer. So it's a blip on the radar. We'll see if that's legit, but he has been tough, and their secondary has not been playing well either. Now, they're without Deron Bland, and they were without Kalen Carson last week. I think Carson's probably going to be back this week. But you can exploit things. Like George Pickens against Trayvon Diggs is a fun matchup, but that's a guy that can get beat on double moves. They don't really have a guy in the middle that can neutralize what Justin Fields does. The run game, theoretically, because we've talked about the run game and its issues, should be able to run. It should be able to run. So the Steelers match up so much better against the Cowboys than they did the Colts. Like, this is a matchup that kind of plays into what the Steelers do well. So if they lose this game, it's either because Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb just take over and the Steelers can't stop them, which is concerning, or the Steelers blow it themselves, which, I mean, let's be real, against the Colts, they had so many missed opportunities. We named them. It was like 6 or 7 of them, so it's possible, but this stylistically plays very well into what the Steelers do well.
The one other concern, at least me looking at the game, is Dak loving going to Ferguson over the middle, where we're kind of that intermediate soft middle of the Steelers, where you say we haven't been getting the linebacker play we expect in that middle of the Steelers D. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that can be something, but what they've been doing with tight ends, they shut down Kyle Pitts. They've been able to do different things. They've been able to, put guys like Deshaun Elliott there, roll Minka into certain coverages to take them away. So definitely, I think, first of all, he and CeeDee Lamb are going to be the 2 targets, but this is not an offense that uses a ton of motion. So you're not going to be switching weak to strength. You're not going to be doing a ton of things that stressed the Steelers' communication last week. So there are definitely things I think to be positive about with the Steelers' defense here and their ways to contain Ferguson. Like I said, I think that the Cowboys are going to get, a few solid drives in all of them. I think they're just too talented. I think Dak is too talented a quarterback not to. Just like Justin Herbert was, got a few drives in on them before he exited. It's probably going to happen again. But I don't think it's going to be nearly as bad. I think they're going to hold them below 20 points. Something like 13 points, 16 points, something around there. Like, the Steelers should be able to win this game. Just fine. They match up well, but it's going to be, as long as they don't let CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott take over this game, that should be a winning recipe.
I like that prediction, Nick. And one prediction I feel confident in making is that all eyes will be on Acrisure Stadium this Sunday night for the marquee matchup of the Steelers and the Cowboys. And of course, Nick will be back on the big show, fresh from the Mike Tomlin news conference next Tuesday, to break down everything that goes right and let's hopefully less that goes wrong in this big game in Pittsburgh. Well, do it again all right here next Tuesday afternoon on the Steelers Breakdown Podcast with Nick Farabaugh. Until then, go Steelers.